What about you, everyone, and welcome to the character profile on YouTube of the big man himself, Jim McDonald.
Did you listen to this to make sure that's not how you started the original?
I definitely don't think I probably did, but I thought got to get the old catchphrases in. Yeah.
If you're playing Jim McDonald bingo at home,
let's cross that one off. So we
play bingo differently.
We've uploaded this one this week because of the Ollie story that's currently going on in Coronation Street and the possibility of where this could have come from, this genetic inheritance.
Yes.
And we do know that Jim has got some kind of what is it that Jim's got? Myotonic dystrophy or something like that.
That's
what
it is.
Keep listening and find out. It's something like that. Anyway, so we thought we'd upload this week and they can have a listen to it. And this was taken from the time when he was in prison with Peter Barlow. He was the landlord, wasn't he? Plying him.
Don't give it all away. They're gonna have to listen to this during the character profile, and then you listen to the original one we did in episode 111, and then we'll pick up afterwards to let you know what happened when he returned. Spoiler alert. It was quite controversial.
It was rather, wasn't it? let's get to that in a minute. But for now, here's our original character profile from episode 111. Okay, character profile time. This week, Jim McDonald. I wanted to do a few weeks ago, but then Jenna went and left and she ruined it.
Jenna ruins everything.
But Jim, he's back. So he is. How many of his catchphrases are we going to get into this little character profile here?
I don't know. Are you starting off with the talking points? Or are you going to go straight into the biographical information?
I've got the notes in the wrong part.
Well,
Here
then
you go.
let me start off with when he was born. He was born on the 14th of November in 1955. So it's possible he might be in it for his birthday.
Oh, yeah, he might be in it for his birthday. 14th, let me just think. If that is like a week and a half before my mum was born.
Maybe they're weirdly co-joined twins.
Maybe. His parents were Edward and Macy McDonald, and he married Liz. Liz Greenwood was her maiden name in 1974, and then again in 2000. He had 3 children, Andy, Steve and Katie, who died.
Well, also Andy died as well.
He might as well have died. He's not been mentioned. No, he got mentioned a little bit, didn't he?
He got a name check a few times.
I'm sure Andy will be back at some point. Well, I hope so. Andy and Steve were born in 1974, and then we had Katie born in 1992. Jim first appeared on the 27th of October 1989, and he's been in around 1,130 episodes so far, which puts him 49 in the most featured character. So that's not bad considering he's how much on again off again he is. And also interesting is he's only 5 episodes behind Peter in the number of episode stakes.
Yeah, so he's been 49th most featured character and the 12th longest running character of the current cast.
If you can kind of include that, but maybe not. He's played by Charles Lawson, did you know?
I did not know that. He was working in the National Theatre when he was first approached to appear on Coronation Street, but he turned them down, and he confessed later in 2009 that he was a bit up his own arse. Then they asked him again the following year, and because they were going to introduce the McDonald's, and he hadn't actually watched it because he was at the pub when it was on. But he decided to give it a shot anyway.
So he seems to be playing himself basically at the moment.
Yeah. So in 1974, before they appeared on the show, he married Liz and they had twins. He served in the Royal Engineers and left Liz to raise the children herself for quite a while. Yeah,
so we got quite a lot in the early days of Coronation Street, sort of talking about him being in the army, and that was quite a big thing. They've not really mentioned it at all this time round.
No, but it is one of the major points about his character is that he's been in the army.
So 1989 was when he moved to Weatherfield with the family, and I think this is not long after he'd left, so this was one of the first time really that he's been a major part of the boys' lives, because Liz had to raise them herself, and he didn't really know what he was doing. So 1990 he turned down the post of an army recruitment officer because he knew Liz hated the army. She kind of resented the fact that she'd been
stolen him away
for all this time, so she was dead against him taking this post. So instead he had a brief stint as a TV repairman, but lost the job after dropping Alf's TV on the floor. Alf Roberts.
That's not going to fix it, is it? So he supports Andy in his desire to join the army, but Liz doesn't want him to go. Then he gets a job as a motorbike repairman under the viaduct.
I'm quite surprised reading that Andy wanted to join the army, because out of the two boys, he was like the studious, intelligent one. And we're not saying that people in the army aren't clever, but you'd have thought that Andy, right from the beginning, would have action-based
person.
Yeah, and I don't think Andy was like that. I would have thought that he would have been like straight off to university, which is kind of what happened, kind of in the end.
In 1991, he convinced Liz not to have an abortion when she gets pregnant, and he starts to build an extension in the backyard to his neighbour's annoyance.
Yeah, so Liz got pregnant that year, and she wanted to have an abortion, but because he missed out on the twins being brought up, he was like, no, I'm going to do it right this time. I'm going to be a really good dad. He got all excited and built this extension in the backyard, and yeah, the people next door weren't too happy about this. But sadly, the baby died, and this was like right at the beginning of the year. Liz gave birth prematurely, and this was all mixed in with the storyline where Steve and Andy were getting involved with some dodgy dealings with stolen radios and things, and there were like gangs that were threatening to beat them up. I think somebody did beat up Andy. Steve was the main one out of the two that was in charge of this, and he runs off for a bit over New Year. Nobody knows where they are, so Liz was getting worried. She has a miscarriage. Yeah. And that was the end of Katie. But Jim very much, I think, blamed Steve for this.
Yeah, he does. He blames him for it.
Yeah, but they got back together again anyway, Liz and Jim. He also got a job at the garage that year under Kevin Webster because his motorbike repair business went under.
Ah, under the viaduct.
We had 1993. He resigned from a security guard post, which he'd acquired in the meantime, because he failed to come to Andy's rescue during an armed robbery. So this is quite interesting. This is obviously where his ideas about armed robbery came from. Andy was there in the bank, and Jim didn't do anything when the robbers came in. So I think he felt like a bit of a coward, and I imagine from somebody coming from the army, that's like doubly shameful.
Yeah, exactly.
But he then, the next time he came across a thief in his security guard job, he really laid into him, beat him up, but it turned out to be just a 15-year-old boy. So
whoops,
whoopsie indeed. Also that year, Liz got her own bar, the Queen's, which Jim helped her to run until he thumped the boss, that is, who he thought that she was having an affair with.
But she hadn't, so she left Jim, the dirty dog, and they both cite for divorce.
Filed for divorce.
Yeah, filed for divorce, citing unreasonable behaviour, but they're back together by New Year, because that's just how they were.
They just can't stay away from each other. They had a very kind of fiery, passionate marriage. They were shouting at each other
just
one
like
minute,
ours.
and then
oh, I love you.
Yeah, but they were like, oh, Elizabeth, let me take you right off to bed, up the stairs,
goodness.
And with Liz giggling away. They really did have a
whirlwind romance.
Yeah,
stormy,
exactly, is the word to describe them. But
like
yeah,
Heathcliff
so they were back
and
together.
whatever the girl's name was.
I don't know.
In 1994, he gets a job at Mike Baldwin's executive taxi firm, and that was all that happened that year.
Nothing else happened that year for Jim.
In 1995, Jim and Liz go up against the Duckworth to buy the Rovers when Bet left, and both the couples needed to sell their houses to raise the money, but the Duckworths eventually came out on top.
Yeah, I think
sadly.
They sold their house to Gary and Judy Mallet, so they were able to do that. I'd have loved to have seen Liz and Jim properly behind the bar at the Rovers. They seem like a really good kind of landlord.
They would be. I
couple.
think quite a lot of people probably who don't watch it but know some of the characters might tell you that they were.
Yeah, because I mean Liz is a great manager at the bar at the moment, isn't she? She's sort of no nonsense.
Right back into that role perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, there's no replacing Bet Lynch, but Liz is by far the one that's come closest to that,
so.
Definitely. And I'd just love to see at some point in the future, like the pair of them standing behind the bar, like Jim with his arm around Liz. They would be brilliant running the Rovers. But anyway, it was not to be because Jack and Vera got it, and they were quite funny as the Rovers. Landlord and landlady for a little bit, even though it didn't really go very well for them.
Jim decides to go into a building partnership instead with Bill Webster.
He had loads of jobs, didn't he, Jim?
They all do.
Yeah.
They all do,
when they want to change the storyline, they give him a new job.
So in 1996, on the way back from an army reunion, Liz, I'm just laughing. Liz confesses that she had an affair with Jim's mate Johnny Johnson.
Johnny Johnson.
Good name. While he was in the army. So Jim takes this very well, and says they should go to couples counselling. No, he
No,
doesn't. He
that's not
drags
his
her out of
style.
the car and he hits her and he leaves her lying in the road and having to find her own way home.
I don't remember whether I've seen that scene or not. I've seen like maybe little clips from it or something, but that's a really, really famous Jim and Liz
Shocking.
scene, I think, where
Terrible.
you get to really see his temper. I mean,
Evil.
He always had a bit of a temper anyway, and he was very strict on the boys when he was looking after them.
Should
But
never go back.
yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? He's a
Once they beat you up and chuck you out the car, that's when I say draw the line.
But she loves him. Still,
See, this is
we
what-
like Jim.
This is what I found when I was watching all that drama with Rihanna and Chris Brown. I thought they've stolen this right off of Coronation Street because they did that first.
It's exactly the same.
Exactly the same. So Liz breaks into their house.
No, Jim breaks into the
Okay,
house.
you don't write the names down of what's going on. You've written Liz does this and then...
So, no, they got home. Jim tried to break into their house with a spade. So Liz has a restraining order.
What, so he kicks her out of the car and drove home without his keys?
I don't know what happened. I told you I don't remember whether I watched it.
Right,
Basically,
okay.
Liz gets home and she takes the car. No, she doesn't take the... Oh, I don't remember.
I've totally confused you, haven't I?
Yeah, confused
But
me.
basically, somebody
Liz takes the house.
breaks into the house.
Jim definitely breaks into the house with a spade, gets a restraining order and spends 3 weeks in Strange Race.
He gets a restraining order against Liz.
She didn't want anything to do with him because he'd beaten her up, hadn't he?
Liz gets... Okay.
Oh, no, I don't understand it. I don't understand the time.
You've written somebody breaks into their house with a spade, then gets a restraining order and then goes to prison. I think you mean Jim breaks in,
yeah,
Liz gets a restraining order
against
and then Jim goes to prison.
It all makes
It wasn't
sense.
all the
this
same
is making
person.
fascinating listening at the moment.
We're very professional.
Got
So-
to make sure we get it right.
And then Jim hits the bottle after his mum dies and Liz demands half of his £40,000 inheritance.
Did you know that Strange Race Prison isn't called Strange Race anymore?
What's it called?
I don't remember. I should have that
What
in
a
my...
great fact.
But it's called Strange Race
Professional
because of the part of...
podcaster.
Oh no, it's just called like Manchester Prison or something like that.
I didn't even know it was in Manchester.
It is. But I also was trying to look up this Highfield prison that they're in at the moment. And you know what? I don't think it actually exists.
No
I couldn't
way.
find any
They wouldn't
reference to
make it up.
Highfield
They
prison.
wouldn't make it up because it takes away the realism.
Sadly, it's true. So, in 1997, Jim had a one-night stand with Steve's ex, Fiona Middleton.
Phillips.
And I thought that was a bit weird.
Middleton?
Oh, not Middleton. Is it Middleton? Yeah?
I'm making you doubt
I think it was
everything you've
Fiona
ever known.
Middleton. Look.
Do you know what the name of the show is?
I don't know anything anymore. He had this lovely lady who Mel B also auditioned for. Just a bit of a fact there.
If only she had got it.
Yes. And then on a scene that I always remember from Jim, it was Fiona and Alan McKenna's wedding. I think he was a police officer or something. And then Jim comes in the back of the church and he's like, "Don't marry him, Fiona. Fiona, you have to tell them about us, her." And she was dumped at the altar by Alan. And he also couldn't believe that the baby she was carrying was his, because he was like, oh, what if it's Jim's baby? But it turns out, it was his after all. And Jim had had a vasectomy as well. They all have vasectomies on Coronation Street, don't they? Is that a normal thing to happen?
I wouldn't know.
Every so often they talk about people having vasectomies. 1998. Another famous scene. There's lots of famous Jim scenes, I think.
I think he's quite an iconic character, as you've
He
already
is.
said.
So this was when... So Steve had obviously not forgiven Jim for sleeping with his ex-girlfriend.
Weird.
And then he doesn't want anything to do with him.
Weird.
It seems reminiscent of what's going on at the moment.
So unusual.
Steve is working on a building site at the moment, but he won't give Jim a job. I think he must own the building business or something, I can't remember. So Jim gets a job at the garage and he goes to the building site crowing to Steve, "Well, I don't need your job because I've got this." Gets into a bit of a scuffle and he topples right off the building site, lands in a skip and then winds up in a wheelchair.
That's right.
I don't know how long he was in a wheelchair for, but there was another famous scene
Yes.
when Maud comes round, who was also she was the character in a wheelchair at the time. It's a brilliant scene where he's like hitting the bottle. I think he tries to kill himself or something, and she goes and tells him what's what and says, "Look," and reminds him of his army days. And she's like, what was your number when you were in the army? And he was able to say it straight away. And she's like, "Well, that Jim McDonald back there wouldn't have given up. He would have fought." And she basically shows him that life isn't over because you're in the wheelchair. Of course, in Coronation Street, if you just get ill or in a wheelchair or in anything, you're back on your feet within.
Doesn't matter.
Which Jim is now, but before then he'd had to go through some occupational therapy with somebody called Michael.
Aww.
I never liked that there was a horrible Michael. I much prefer there being a nice Michael now.
You never know, it might turn out to be a wrong one.
This therapist had an affair with Liz, and they went off
Whoops.
to the Milton Keynes together, and she and Jim divorced.
Aww.
So, I mean, she's treated him pretty badly as well.
Tit for tat, isn't it?
Yeah. 2000, he beat up Jez Quigley, whose name appears fairly regularly on this podcast, considering that he's had such a small part. So he was there. He got Steve involved with drug trafficking in his taxis or something, and so Jim. He beats Steve up, and then Jim then goes around to Jez's house and beats him black and blue, and then in hospital Jez dies of a ruptured spleen. So Jim is sentenced to manslaughter, 8 years in prison.
Whoops.
And that's what I remember, and I'm thinking, oh, I love Jim, I hope he comes back. But after that was like the end of his
he marries Liz in prison.
Yeah, that was the end of his regular time, but he's been in and out of it loads since then. I think, yeah, one of the last things we saw was him remarrying Liz in prison. So it was a bit sad when he left. Apparently he was just Charles was just summoned to the Corrie producer's office after a day's filming to tell him that he was fired.
Whoops.
Which is a bit
That's
sad.
really mean.
I know. But he did think it was the right thing to do, because he says that things were going round in circles a bit for Jim. He says, after 10 years, I would have to agree that Jim was beginning to disappoint both the show and myself as an actor, so this was neither a shock nor a surprise. He didn't like the idea, though, that he was going to be a murderer. And originally, he was supposedly, there were rumours that he was that Jim was going to kill his then girlfriend Gwen, who I've got no memory whatsoever of. But that didn't turn out to be true. But he did murder someone anyway. I think if you think if you're a murderer in Coronation Street, you think that that's it, going to be locked away forever. But no, he's able to come back. So 2003 was his first return to the street, and this was in this coincided with Bette Lynch's one of her returns. So a year before his scheduled release on licence, Jim escaped from prison because he thought that Liz was having an affair with her pub manager in Blackpool. So they all went off to Blackpool together, and I remember a funny scene where Bette was there with Jim, and then police cars drive down the road, and Jim's like, they're going to see me, so Bette grabs him and gives him a big old snog to try and hide him from the police. But anyway, he gets together with Liz, and they decide that they're going to flee to Ireland together. So they get a little boat and set sail across the Irish Sea. They don't get very far because they discover Ashley Peacock and Claire having a bit of nautical troubles. What a
coincidence.
No, they were there as well. I can't remember what they were doing there, but anyway, they need rescuing in their boat. So they get back and they get arrested.
Whoops.
Well, he gets
saying
arrested.
Whoops. Stop saying whoops.
Whoops, but Jim's life's been a big load of whoopses.
Whoopsies. 2005, he has a fight with his cellmate and gets his parole cancelled, and he's not going to get out till 2008.
Yeah, sad. So Liz gives up waiting for him and files for divorce again.
But he gets released in 2007 for good behaviour, and it looks like he's reformed.
I think I remember this. I've got vague memories of Jim coming back, and it was only like 6-7 years ago that he was like a proper decent bloke, and he was like trying to
be nice to everybody.
Yeah.
But then he hears about Liz getting married to Vernon Tomlin, and he beats him up.
Vernon was such an idiot.
Yep. And then Steve tells him to get lost. So who's moaning about telling who to get lost now? Steve.
It's all right. He said it's all tit for tat, isn't it? That was on Vernon and Liz's wedding day, wasn't it, or something like that? And he had that stupid cowboy hat on.
Yeah.
So in 2009, Jim was in it for a bit for Steve's wedding to Becky. He just came and sort of showed that there was no bad blood, I guess. And then 2010...
Even though you told me to get lost, I don't have any hard feelings. Just remember this for the future.
Yeah. I forgot that Jim was out of prison for so long. In my head, he's just like been in prison all this time. And like he's not known life outside of prison for 10 years. But no, he's
been
got up to something for a couple of years then. 2010, he celebrated his 55th birthday with Steve, and he attended Jack Duckworth's funeral. He sent Liz some flowers, which doesn't go down too well with her current boyfriend, who was Owen Armstrong, who was definitely a bit more of a nut. He was, I mean,
bit rough around the
there's always some kind of really big alpha male in Coronation Street, and it was like Len Fairclough for a long time, and Jim kind of, in a way, took over that role, and now it's definitely Owen. So it's like the two at loggerheads.
Yeah.
Not good. So Owen arranged to have Jim beaten up.
Yep.
Oh.
2011, he meets up with Liz again, and he suggests that they buy the Rovers from Steve and give the marriage another go.
Yeah. So he tries to get some money off of Kevin, who just won the lottery on the scratch card. Has he still got that money?
I don't know. He had to give half of it to Sally, didn't he?
It gets mentioned every now and again, but that's one of these storylines that
so
is like
weird.
Yeah, and like if you're a lottery winner, that kind of stays with you, doesn't it? And it's
well, I don't know about scratch cards.
But you got like £100,000 or something.
Oh, they know. We really want some money. So anyway, he refuses. Kevin refuses to give him the money. And so Jim decides to rob a bank.
Every time Jim does something stupid like that, I'm like screaming at the screen, no, don't do it, because I just
idiot.
want to see him
Why are you doing
happily
that?
married with Liz.
Well, no.
That bank robbing storyline was kind of exciting, but yeah, a little bit stupid.
A little bit, yeah. So he gets arrested. And I think wasn't Liz watching him on CCTV and crying and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he like wants to speak to her, doesn't
he? Oh yeah,
he?
he's got a hostage situation or something going on, or something like
yeah,
that.
it was ridiculous.
It kind of escalated slightly.
Yeah.
And Liz promises to Jim that she's going to wait for him, but then she doesn't go to his trial, and he gives up on his family, gets given a minimum of 7 years in prison.
Yeah,
so that was in 2011, so he should be out in 2018.
There's still the opportunity for him to come out and be back in the show, but
yeah, well, that's what they did with Tracy, and they let him out earlier on, but I don't know if you can continually get let out for good behaviour when it's your like third go round.
Well, when they're let out sort of early, it's like you serve half your time, isn't it? So if he was going to be let out for good behaviour, then that could be around now or next year or something. But I mean, if they find out about him being behind this booze stuff,
oh dear.
Yeah. So he's back again this year as the landlord, providing alcohol to Peter Barlow in prison.
No,
what an exciting life Jim has led.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So he obviously dips in and out of being on Corrie, but he also works on the stage, and he's including the RSC and on TV in the Bill, Casualty, Holby.
I remember
just
when
like
he was on the
everybody
bill.
else.
I remember he was on the bill. I was really excited, and I was absolutely shocked because that was the first time that I saw him without his moustache. And there's like he was so famous for having that little
moustache,
little tash, and then when he was on it was like his face was naked.
Oh no. And he also has run a farm shop.
I think he still does run a farm
we should
shop.
I think we've mentioned this before, and we said we should go and buy some sausages.
Probably too far away. It's up north, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's always said that he's willing to go back to Corrie for a good storyline, because I've seen interviews with him saying, yeah, the money was really good. I could do with that every now and again. And
wouldn't it be great if you could just dip into like a nice big cash fund, somebody paying for you to be famous for a bit?
I think by and large, when he has come back, it has been for some kind of good storylines as well.
Yeah, he's had some, like you say, he's had some really good storylines.
A really kind of explosive character, isn't he? Sort of gets in because of his hot temper and everything, and in his criminal past, and he's gonna beat someone up at some point. It's always exciting, but you still love him as a character.
I know, even though really you wouldn't. Why would you like somebody who's a wife beater? Because that's dreadful.
I know. He's just kind of funny though, isn't he? When I don't like Owen particularly, or I like him a bit more now, but when he was like the big alpha male, I didn't like him. I don't remember seeing very much of Len Fairclough on the classic Coronation Streets, but I don't think I would have liked him particularly. But Jim, there's just something about him, the Irish charm, I guess.
It's true.
I mean, you've only seen him on these little returns, but you've enjoyed him when he's on, haven't you? It's been good when he's come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we've been able to go through this whole character profile without talking very much about the most famous thing about Jim, which is his catchphrases, of course. I think this has been one of the things that's made him such a memorable character. It's the same as like Fred Elliott with his...
Yeah, a good catchphrase will take you a long way on Coronation Street.
And Jim has very many, which is why we were able to do our little Jim bingo a few weeks ago on Twitter. I must confess, we haven't been filling in our Jim bingo card, but I think he must have said pretty much everything on it now.
Yeah. What are some of those catchphrases?
Cheerio, Noi.
Yeah.
Stephen.
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah.
And of course, the classic, so it is.
Yeah.
So it is.
Yeah.
I even saw there was an article on the Metro website that was published when Jim came back, and there was the headline of the article is like everyone has the same joke on Twitter when Jim comes back, and it just showed a stream of tweets, people saying, "Oh, I'm so glad to see Jim, so I am," and "Oh, Jim's back, so he is." And it'd be like if Fred rose from the dead.
Aww.
With his "I say."
Aww. Who else has got catchphrases? I don't even know.
Well, Archie Shuttleworth was another one, wasn't he?
On it now?
Nobody. I mean, it's a bit
old-fashioned.
It's a bit old-fashioned. It's a bit like unrealistic. I mean, I think you could get away with.
I say whoops a lot, apparently.
I don't. People don't have catchphrases though, do they? Really? I don't know. Do people say things?
A lot.
Hilda had her was it malapropisms or something? Is that what the word's called? Like with her Muriel and everything. But I think some of the best catchphrases are ones that come sort of develop naturally, or they come from the actors themselves. Because when Jim was cast or given the part, Jim McDonald was never supposed to be a Northern Irishman. His lines were sort of in the Manchester dialect, and when he came to read them, he was like, "Well, this is going to sound ridiculous." A Northern Irish person calling people chuck or whatever that they say.
Yeah, we do.
So the script writers were like, "Well, what sort of things
what do Irish people say?
What do they sound like?" So he just added in some of his "so it is" and whatever, and it kind of stuck from there. And then the script writers just sort of started putting them in, and that's the same with Fred, because he got his repeating himself from the bloke who lived next door when he was little.
Oh, see, they do have catchphrases in real life then.
But when John Sabadon was little, that's quite a long time ago, back in the olden days when people had a good catchphrase.
Oh.
But I don't know. That's what people. I think we need another good catchphrase in Corrie now. I'll just try and think of one up. But it makes him into a bit of a caricature. I guess that's why we like him. The best, most memorable Corrie characters are caricatures, aren't they? Like
yes.
Bet Lynch's and your Hilda Ogdens and everything.
You can't turn your back on Corrie's heritage, really.
No.
And say that, oh no, we want to be realistic soap like EastEnders or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. Are there catchphrases in EastEnders? No, we wouldn't know.
Alfie!
So, do you think that overall Jim is a goodie or a baddie?
Baddie.
You reckon?
You can't beat your wife up and be a goodie. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that as a woman, I can't condone domestic violence.
But he's not like among the ranks of like the Charlie Stubbs and the Richard Hillmans and the Pat Phelans or anything, is he? Although Phelan was quite a charmer as well.
He's definitely a villain at the moment because he's given Peter alcohol and manipulating him to try to get his family back and being generally unpleasant, isn't he?
He is, but at the same time, lots of viewers are saying, "No, I want him to get back with Liz," and Peter kind of deserves it.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I don't like him. I'm saying I love Tracy too, but she's a buddy.
Yeah, I do feel sorry for Jim's predicament at the moment.
Yeah, I feel sorry for him too, but you can't say he's a good person.
No, I guess if they brought him back for good, eventually, if it happens, they'll have to end it with him.
And stuff.
Yeah, they'll have to end up being nice because
everyone gets made boring.
I think we just need to end this character profile with the biggest question about Jim: is he or is he not better without his moustache?
That was a really hard question to answer by the way you worded it.
Moustache or no moustache?
What do you think? Know.
You don't even know what he looks like. Find out what he looks like.
I do. What do you mean I don't know what he looks like?
Okay. I don't know. I thought that's what you meant. I don't know whether you've watched it with him with a moustache, but you can picture him in a moustache in your mind.
He doesn't have one, and that's how.
He doesn't have one at the moment.
Yeah.
I was quite shocked, like I said, when he shaved it off. I'm getting used to it now. But that was all part of his iconic look. It'd be like if Hilda took her curlers off, it'd be a shock for the beginning. Or if Bet didn't have her leopard skin and wore something else. But I guess you get used to it.
You have to get used to it, darling.
Yeah, I don't know what our listeners think. Jim, better or worse without his moustache? Let us know what you think.
Stop asking it in a strange way. Do you prefer a moustache or no moustache?
Yes. Same with Kevin.
Oh, Kevin, no.
So there you go, there's Jim. We love Bitter Jim. I'm glad we were able to do him as a character profile. I'm glad he's back. Hope he's going to be back.
For long time.
I don't know how long he's in it. I honestly don't know how long he's in it for this time, but I know he's not been given a permanent contract. But one day.
Maybe he'll get it extended.
Yeah. He's a really, really is a classic Coronation Street character.
He is.
Yeah. Not like some of our other classic ones that we do, just old characters.
Oh, rubbish.
Anyway, there's Jim. Hope you. I'm sure. I know that a lot of our listeners like him. If anyone's got any other thoughts they'd like to share about Jim, write in and let us know. And so that was the end of Jim McDonald, for a little while at least, but we have seen him back on Coronation Street in 2018 since we recorded this, in, as you said earlier, quite a controversial storyline.
It's an infamous storyline where Jim returns, he comes back to the street and
he's out of jail.
Yeah, he tells Liz that he has found their daughter Katie is still alive, and this was a heartbreaking story when we just heard about the McDonald's losing Katie, who was she
she died a few days after she was born, I think.
And there was a mix-up at the hospital, apparently, over 20 years ago. And actually, she was the story that she was adopted in Australia, because she has an Australian accent.
Yeah, she was swapped over and then taken to Australia. Now, I remember when the news of this story broke and everybody really kicked off, didn't they?
There weren't very many people who were saying...
Massive retcon.
No, this could be good, everybody. Just hold on.
Fortunately, I mean, I think
it wasn't as bad.
As it could have been, because they made it clear very, very quickly that it was a con.
It wasn't
on the
actually
part
Katie.
of Jim and Hannah.
Jim and Hannah had met. I think she had written to him in prison, or he was definitely a prisoner when they met, and they fell in love with each other,
which was
apparently.
weird.
And she's incredibly young compared to him. Young enough to be his daughter. And they decided to return to the street and pull a con on the McDonald family, specifically Liz, in revenge for the fact that they didn't show enough sympathy when Jim was diagnosed with his illness.
Yeah, so Hannah just wanted the money, and Jim thought that he'd
wanted
tag along.
No, I think Hannah kind of turned it into a moral crusade as well, because she kept saying to him, any time he wavered, she kept saying, they don't deserve you, they were horrible to you. I can just imagine the amount of bad mouthing that Jim did to Hannah when he was telling her about his backstory, and she just completely believed everything 100%. And I can just imagine him sort of thinking to himself, well, it wasn't that bad, but I can't, I've got to save face.
Now.
So they basically collude together to con the family to get money.
Yeah, particularly Liz, who ends up offering like £10,000 to his daughter.
Jim is not. Yeah, because Jim's furious because that's not enough money. But I think Hannah pretended to be sick as well, didn't she?
Yeah.
And Liz felt guilty, offered her money. It wasn't enough for Jim. There was a whole massive blackmailing storyline. He found out about the fact that Johnny and Liz had a relationship. He did not like this at all.
Basically, he starts to develop feelings for Liz again, doesn't he? Which Hannah tries to steer him away from.
He gets involved with
that McDonald magnetism.
Oh yeah, he gets involved with the fact that he knew that Johnny and Liz had a relationship, and Jenny didn't know, so he tried to bribe him to get the money. He basically spent the whole time after money, and it was implied that he needed it because he was disabled because of his illness and he couldn't work. And Hannah was a freeloader who was only good at conning people.
They really did do a number on Jim McDonald. They've kind of thrown his character under a bus, haven't they? He was...
Yeah, he was...
We spoke in the first character profile about how he was a bit of a wrong-un, particularly after that whole beating up Liz incident in 1996.
The domestic abuse stuff.
But people still liked him. He's a really kind of charismatic character, wasn't he? And still, I think, looking back at him, now that like a couple of years have passed since this story's gone on, it's like, I want Jim to come back again. I quite like Jim, really, even though everything he's done.
Charlie Lawson as Jim McDonald has a very magnetic presence in the show, and that definitely helps Jim's appeal.
Yeah,
Hannah was definitely played as like the shrewish, evil other half, who was the manipulator. And Jim was just kind of a hurt old man who had fallen on hard times. I think Corrie kind of immediately tried to walk back this scheme as his idea, even though it clearly was his idea, and try to make us sympathise with him more than Hannah.
Yeah, and like I said, he ended up developing feelings for Liz a little bit, and she couldn't keep away from him, and it looked like a time that he was going to end up with her, but in the end Hannah drops him in it, doesn't she? Or she engineers it.
Him
in
the bathroom when she knew that Liz was going to come out and see them.
So Liz,
And then she's like, guess what? We're not really related.
Yeah, heartbreaking. I mean, I think one of the main problems that people had with this is because it is the fact that the Katie story, when it happened back in the early 90s, was really, really sensitively played by Charlie and Bev. And Corrie viewers felt that it was a bit of a betrayal of all of that. And it was a story that really put the McDonalds on the map, as it were, because they weren't so popular before then. And I, since recording this character profile, have had a chance to watch this story on the ITV3 repeats, and it really was played fantastically, and I can see why people warmed a lot more to the McDonalds having viewed it. And nobody likes retcon, do they? And this would have been so incredulous, and the fact, as I say, I'm glad that we were told as viewers it's a con, but still the fact that Liz believed it all along, it kind of made you think, come on, open your eyes, Liz. But maybe she just wanted to believe that her daughter was alive.
Yeah, I mean, she was heartbroken. The final time that Liz and Jim see each other, and when Jim leaves the show, is when there's a confrontation. After it all comes out, she's pretending, and Liz, blah blah blah.
They end up at Katie's grave, don't they?
Grave.
And say what you like about the story, I would say that graveyard scene was fantastically done, and Liz pushes him over, doesn't she? And he does an amazing fall backwards, and he's just like a weak, frail old man with his walking stick.
He's like Voldemort when he gets conquered and he turns into a little baby in a train station.
Totally. Exactly the same as I got the idea from.
He's a train station baby.
And even after that, it looked like Jim might have learned a lesson, and he kind of tells Hannah, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. But he goes off with her because she's offering him something, and other than the loneliness, hopeless life that he would have been faced with otherwise.
That he's left at the end saying, I care about you. And he probably knows that perhaps she doesn't really, or not as much as Liz would do, but he's burned his bridges now.
He has burnt his bridges.
He's burnt down the bypass.
Yeah,
the ring road.
And he's burnt down the fire station and the carpentry shop, so there is no chance of those bridges being rebuilt now.
No, sadly not.
Or is there?
Well, I mean, the door is not closed, is it, for
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, one of the good things about Jim is you never know when he's going to pop up again.
I know, this is why I kind of didn't really like the story, because the final story, because I always imagined Jim just popping up, and I think Charlie Lawson said this as well. So every 5 years or so, he would return to the street to sort of try and win Liz back. And
even in the previous story with the stuff in prison with Peter, Jim acted pretty despicably, and it already looked like they were turning him even more into the villain of the piece. But there was still a chance that things could have got back on track with him and Liz. But in the real world, there's really no way that they can reconcile their differences after this. But it's such a shame because those actors, the characters, have got such fantastic chemistry together.
Yeah.
And I'd still kind of like to see them as two old fogies in their 80s.
Yeah.
Rocking chairs next to each other.
I mean, it would be really nice if
they're made for each other.
If Liz ever sort of leaves the show forever, to sort of have her retire off to some farm, stud farm, with Jim. Or who's miraculously been cured, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to be seeing the back of Simon Gregson anytime soon, so there'll always be tales of what Liz is up to, and the fact that Jim is out of prison now. I mean, I don't think we know where he is. I think they said a couple of months after he left, we heard that they'd been arrested. Him and Hannah had been intercepted, but they couldn't build a case against them, so they let them go.
Liz did actually give them the money in the end, didn't they? The £10,000.
I can't remember.
And so the fact that she gave it to them and they didn't sort of coerce her, it meant that the police is like, we can't just go around getting money off people because you changed your mind.
So he's a free man.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder whether, I mean, he might as well be just off in Australia now.
Why not?
But you never know. I
think I'd quite fancy New Zealand right now.
Fantastic character who has really been misused maybe and given some iffy stories, but on a performance-wise, he always delivers.
Charlie Lawson is such a presence on the screen. He fills it up every time he's in a scene.
He does. There's so much more they could do with Jim if they wanted to bring him back full time. Yeah. I'd love it, but we'll just have to see, won't we?
This is where the story ends for Jim.
Yes.
And it's perhaps a to be continued, and perhaps the end. We don't know.
So just have to wait and see.
We will.
Right, for now, everybody, thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this.
Find us on
like and subscribe.
Twitter, Facebook, everywhere.
And we'll be back next week for another character profile and this weekend for a podcast. So we'll see you there.
Yeah.
Ta-ra for now.